Imagine two newsrooms side by side. In the first, reporters argue over each word, debate with each other, and wrestle with ideas until the sentences begin to breathe. In the second, an AI prompt is written and a confident, polished article appears within seconds. Which newsroom do you trust? And perhaps more importantly, which newsrooms are increasingly informing us? My name is Munir Shamsu Muhammad. I am a journalist and researcher right here in Ethiopia. And like many of us, I've watched AI move from curiosity to coworker over the past few years. And today, I want to tell you that one of the biggest dangers of our time is not that the machines will become too smart and rise up against us, but that we might become too lazy and complacent to stay respectably human. Of course, AI has affected nearly every industry over the past few years. Just a few weeks back, Pope Leo urged his priests to stop using ChatGPT when writing their homilies. The newsroom in the media landscape is no different. Media houses increasingly rely on AI models to summarize documents, to add context, and unfortunately, to even generate articles. Journalists across the world are increasingly producing content stripped of nuance and often laced with the same hidden model biases of whatever models they're using. But even worse and more alarming is that readers are increasingly using AI to consume those very same articles. This should force the question, what does intellectual growth mean when we outsource both our creative and cognitive capacities? What happens to the part of us that was meant to grow through intellectual, creative struggle? Let me take you back to 1847 Vienna. At the General Hospital, two clinics sit side by side. In the midwives' ward, 2 to 3 mothers from every 100 died from childbed fever. In the second, run by young medical doctors, the death rate had reached an alarming 18%. A young Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed a deadly pattern. When his friend and colleague died after cutting himself during an autopsy, Semmelweis concluded that the young doctors were carrying cadaveric particles from the dead straight to living mothers. He would order chlorine hand washing across the clinic, and the death rate declined to below 2% within weeks. You would think Semmelweis was celebrated and received acclaim, but rather he was fired, ridiculed, and eventually ended up in an asylum. He would die at the age of 47 from sepsis, the very disease he was ironically trying to fight. Today, we face a slightly more seductive danger. It's not that the crowd mind is going to be silencing original thought, but that convenience might be. Science has already begun measuring the costs. In a 2025 Media Lab study at MIT, 54 young adults were told to write essays as their brains were being scanned. One group used ChatGPT, one group used search engines, and one group used solely their minds. Unsurprisingly, the ChatGPT group finished the fastest. But a look at the brain scans revealed the weakest connectivity in areas pertaining to creativity, executive control, and core memory. 83% of the ChatGPT group could not even remember or quote a passage from what they had written just minutes earlier. The researchers called it the accumulation of cognitive debt. I have understood it to mean something like financial debt, useful at a very emergency situation, but potentially draining of vital resources in the long run. And I fear this might be the case with our cognitive resources. Just like money, we might struggle in settling the interest payments while losing something extremely vital and precious as we aggressively embrace automated, outsourced thinking. Let's go back in history once more. Psychologist Carl Jung believed that beneath our everyday thoughts lies something ancient, a shared history of stories and symbols embedded into the very architecture of our brains. The hero, the shadow, the wise elder. He called it the collective unconscious, a repository of wisdom from every culture and every age right in our brains. We occasionally get to glean it through dreams and visions. Whether you take Jung literally or metaphorically, the idea is powerful. Human intelligence is not something that just computes. It's an ancient evolutionary fire stoked by the lived experiences of generations of humans. We become estranged from that depth when we outsource so many of the qualities that make us distinctively human. We get closer to that depth when we wrestle with ideas, when we engage in difficult conversation, when we sit in silence, and when we doubt ourselves. Because evolution, both collectively and individually, occurs in tension, in struggle, in challenge. And I would argue that our increasing use of AI is quietly removing that very necessary tension. We're outsourcing so much the necessary struggle that shapes and sharpens our psyche. But even a greater danger might lie in this overall trend. This image was generated by ChatGPT, by the way. Cognitive biases. Those mental shortcuts caused by social pressures and emotions which help us make decisions quickly, but also overemphasize convenient data and ignore uncomfortable truth. And here's the crucial point. Our engagement with AI is not necessarily one way. And we increasingly outsource our thinking and our reflection, we risk having our very same biases amplified and strengthened, not just reflected back at us. And all of this happens usually without us noticing it. If you ask, why is my idea brilliant? You'll receive an answer. If you ask, what are its fatal flaws? You will also receive an answer. The problem is not necessarily in the machine, but in our comfort and quiet concession. If we seek affirmation, we receive it. If we're tired, we're willing to live with just good enough. And slowly but surely we begin outsourcing not just labor, but judgment. Not just research, but reflection. Not just drafts, but discernment. And through time, both us and the machines become trained to coexist in a comfortable, cozy bubble. I would argue that this is certainly not how intellectual growth happens. I would even go as far as saying this might risk atrophying one of evolution's greatest gifts. Let's recall what happened with social media. It promised connection and it delivered it to a certain degree. But it also gave us echo chambers, polarization, and algorithms which increasingly have learned to hold our attention better than we can. I'll think of a similar dynamics to reasoning itself. When we outsource so much of the mental faculties which make us distinctively human, we become easier to influence. And when influence becomes easier, power concentrates. And if recent revelations about the powerful suggest bear any weight, more concentration of power is the last thing any of us would want to see. But I'm not here, by the way, to demonize technology in any sense. Fire could burn villages or cook food. The printing press could spread knowledge and wisdom or hate and propaganda. And the conscious and intelligent use of AI could lift millions out of poverty, help us in finding cures for all types of diseases, and find answers to deep philosophical mysteries. The question is not whether these machines have become too powerful. The question I'm asking is, what remains of us? What remains of this ancient sacred intelligence when we outsource so much of what makes us distinctively human? In our newsroom, we're trying to evolve. We've dropped short surface level summaries of press releases, surface level copy. We're trying to choose depth. It's harder, it's slower, but it's likely to be worth it, because good journalism, good research, good product, like evolution, needs to be wrestled with and lived. You, the youth of Ethiopia, Africa, and the world, are certainly not the first generation to encounter transformative tools, but you might be the first generation asked to decide whether thinking itself becomes optional. And you should say no, obviously. So the next time you go to the machine and try to write a prompt, sit with a blank page a little longer. Let your brain strain. That strain is not inefficiency. And let's not become efficient at the cost of being shallow either. Let our use of AI extend those very beautiful and human qualities outward, but not replace the very necessary thinking that shapes and polishes and makes sense of the world. Let the next great poems, next great discoveries, next courageous truth come not from algorithms alone, but from young humans who refused to outsource their souls. Thank you.